So the question that I want to answer today is what makes a really good use case for Copilot Cowork and Dynamics 365 ERP? And some of these criteria that I will use also applies to other Cowork use cases. So if you're not using it with Dynamics, you could also benefit from some of them. But specifically, I am focused on Dynamics ERP use cases. Over the past couple of weeks, I've worked with dozens of customers that are looking for use cases to use Copilot Cowork with the Dynamics 365 ERP plugin. And I have learned so much talking to customers about Copilot Cowork that I really felt this was something useful to share. So, a question that customers ask me now all the time is that when they go into M365 Copilot, they see this toggle between chat and Cowork. And since Cowork can do the same thing as chat, it's not always clear when should you use chat and when should you use Cowork. And what I try to do in my work with customers is really help them to understand what Cowork is good for. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. When would you use a use case for Cowork instead of simply just prompting the chat? I talk to customers about which departments, which organizations, which types of scenarios they would want to use Copilot Cowork to enhance the way that their business work. And then usually they send me a couple of use cases that they think could be good with Cowork, and then I would review that. And one of the most common issues that I see is that the use case doesn't start with a person in mind. And what I mean by that is that Cowork is really a coworker, which means that you need a worker that starts the prompt. And so you always should have someone in mind that is going to enter the prompt in Cowork and then do something with the output. Or even if they're not entering the prompt into the system, someone will have to look at the output that comes out of Cowork. And if it's not clear that there's a specific person responsible for that, if that's more like a department or an organization that is interested in the results, perhaps Cowork is not the right place to do that. Specifically, if you're looking at connecting Copilot Cowork with Dynamics 365 ERP, you need to ask yourself, does the user actually have access to do that in the system? Because it's unlikely that you have a user that doesn't have access to do it in the ERP system, but you want them to be able to do this from Copilot Cowork. So think about who is the persona that's going to be using this use case or prompt within Cowork. If it's not tied to a user, if it's more a general thing or some process instead of user action that you want to automate, you could do much better with a custom agent. And then you could easily build something with Copilot Studio. Especially the new orchestrator is really incredible. If your use case or scenario that you want to automate is not tied to a specific person that would enter the prompt, perhaps consider a custom agent instead. Then the second issue that I see customers run into when they think of use cases for Copilot Cowork is that they come up with the use cases that we've already solved in other agents. So for example, one customer sent me a lot of use cases that they had in mind, and many of them were different variations of variance analysis. And we have the finance solution, we can put a link down below, that has variance analysis already solved in Excel. So if variance analysis is your use case, don't use Cowork for that. Use the agents that we already have out of the box. Another example is I have a customer that wants to generate a lengthy report based on data for their suppliers that is available on the internet. Cowork can do this, definitely, but also the researcher can do it. And the researcher has a lot of specific features that make it great at generating reports and doing research. So in that case, I would say instead use the researcher. So make sure that when you think of a use case that would work with Cowork, that it doesn't do something that has already been solved by other agents that is in the Microsoft portfolio and that already works really well. Then the third thing that I would say is that the process is really a multi-step workflow. So it means that it's not going to be just data retrieval, right? If you toggle to the chat, then of course it's easy to retrieve data. In the case of Cowork, you really wanted to be able to do actions in the system, maybe to create records, create emails. That also means that the data input could be various emails and D365 data. Perhaps it's coming from WorkIQ or some of the third-party plugins that is in Cowork. So if it's a data retrieval, then also look at creating a custom agent that could just look up that data. You could also just go into the system and look it up if it's not something that needs to be aggregated or modified in any way. Of course, for reporting, you can build a report. So make sure that the use case that you select actually has multiple steps that Cowork can plan out, because that's what it's good at: making a plan, following that plan, and then doing actions and creating artifacts. Do this instead of just looking up data or just trying to aggregate something from the system. And then the fourth tip, which I left for last, but that I really think is the most important, is that if you're looking for use cases that you want to implement in your system with your business users, they have to drive real business value by either saving times or making better decisions or reducing manual effort. If you have a use case that you think is kind of nice to have, I don't think it's going to cut it for Cowork, because Cowork is consumption billed. So that means you will pay for the credits that you use. And if your use case is just sort of something that slightly speeds up what someone's doing or just makes it easier for them to do something instead of going into the system, I don't think it's a good use case for Cowork. Make sure that you find a use case that really speeds up a process that would take a person multiple steps and hours to complete, that Cowork can then just run in a couple of minutes. So that would be my final tip. Make sure that you choose use cases for Cowork that are really valuable, and that can drive the business forward. Thanks for watching. This video was slightly different than my previous videos in that it wasn't a how-to, it was more my opinion on how I think you should be implementing Copilot Cowork. If you like the format, please let me know down below. And if there's something specific that you'd like to know with Copilot Cowork, especially as it relates to Dynamics 365 ERP and the plugin within Cowork, please let me know and I'll be happy to make a video about that.